Good evening, everyone. Let's begin. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the privilege of serving as director of Roosevelt House, and we're delighted to welcome you to an appreciation of an academic and political icon, Ken Sherrill. To understand the political impact, I go back to his race for district leader in 1977 with Joyce Miller, I think, running as the female leader, as they called it in those days. And Joyce is, of course, the wife of Congressman Jerry Nadler and teaches here often at Roosevelt House to bring it full cycle. And to understand the academic impact, one only needed at a certain point to look at a selection of clips that Hunter employees get, the CUNY clips, to see the constant turning to the expertise of Ken for political comment and historical context over the years. And of course the New York Times and everyone else who would quote him routinely. So we miss him as both a pioneer and a pundit, but we're honored and delighted that Erin Mayo Adam, who is the head of the Roosevelt House LGBTQ Center, has gathered this group to seek to understand a little bit more about Ken. And we have a wonderful group from academia, from government and politics, and from LGBTQ activism. Andy Hum has done programs here before, so we're delighted to have him back. Andrew Gurnardis has been a major factor not only in Brooklyn and in the legislature, but also as a Grove leader here at Roosevelt House. For 2 years, he has led a cohort of students and given them exposure to the process and also to Albany itself. So we're grateful to have you back out of season, but I know you're teaching at Hunter as well, so you are a familiar face in these parts. And right on cue, my friend of half a century, believe it or not, former controller Scott Stringer is joining us as well. Scott, it's great to have you here. Scott has been a friend of mine ever since 1972, when he told his mother that he was no longer listening to her because she didn't support Bella Abzug for Congress. It takes a lot of chutzpah because I knew his mother too, and so
never grow up.
never, no. So, Erin Mayo Adam, who organized this program, the director of our center, she's an assistant professor in the political science department, which of course was Ken's department. She is going to be teaching again after maternity leave in the spring, and she is also running a series of terrific programs. If you haven't come, there's still time to see film screenings and hear discussions. And with that, let me turn it over to Erin Mayo Adam. Here's your mic.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening's event where we're going to be celebrating Ken Sherrill and his impact on New York State politics and also LGBTQ research and political science, where he's really a groundbreaking legend in the field and a mentor to basically every young LGBTQ scholar in political science. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to just talk about his impact more broadly. Before we begin, I wanted to just give really brief introductions of each of the panelists, and then we'll just open with some general questions and specific questions about Ken. So just in alphabetical order, first we have State Senator Andrew Gurnardis, who's the state senator representing the 26th district in New York, which encompasses Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Sunset Park, Park Slope, Gowanus, and other neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And I kind of truncated it with the other neighborhoods because I'm actually a constituent of State Senator Gurnardis, and so I know him mostly as the state senator from Bay Ridge. And he's been an excellent state senator. Before serving as state senator, Gurnardis worked for Vincent Gentile as a constituent aide. Following Hurricane Sandy, Gurnardis founded Bay Ridge Cares, a local nonprofit dedicated to disaster relief and building community, along with Councilmember Justin Brannan. And Gurnardis is also a graduate of Hunter College's political science department, so another reason to like Andrew Gurnardis. and holds a law degree from George Washington University's law school. He's also a former student of Ken Sherrill, so we're really excited to have him on the panel this evening. We also have Andy Hum. Andy has been a gay activist and journalist since 1974, and one of the leaders of the 50 Group Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights that carried the city's gay rights bill from 1977 to passage in 1986. And we actually just held a big event about the opening of the archive on that process this summer. He was also worked on education and self-help programs at CUNY Graduate Center and served as Director of Education at the Heatrick Martin Institute for LGBTQ youth from 1986 to 1985. In addition, he has written for the Gay and Mainstream Press since 1975, including for New York City News, LGNY, The Village Voice, Gay City News, and as a stint as editor of a social policy magazine about social movements. And so we're really excited to have him with us this evening as well. Next, we have Gabriel Magni. He's an assistant professor of political science, founding director of the LGBTQ+ Politics Research Initiative, and director of the Global Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles. During the 2023-2024 academic year, he was a visiting scholar at the Russell Sage Foundation. And Gabriel has published several articles on LGBTQ+ politics in leading academic journals and has conducted the largest survey to date of LGBTQ+ political candidates in partnership with the Victory Institute. And he is currently working on a book on the experiences of LGBTQ+ politicians. And Gabriel, like myself, we're both former mentees of Ken, so we'll have a lot to say on his academic accomplishments. And last but not least, we have Scott Stringer, who's a lifelong New Yorker and has served as in New York City as the comptroller, the Manhattan Borough president, and as an assembly member. As comptroller, Stringer exposed waste and mismanagement and oversaw the city's $240 billion pension funds as it grew to record levels. Stringer is committed to a thriving city that keeps its contract with every New Yorker for public safety, housing, education, justice, and a sustainable environment. And as he explores a campaign for mayor in 2025, Scott will be meeting with New Yorkers from every section of our city. So he's exploring a new campaign. So we're really excited to have him with us as well. All right, so I thought we'll just begin tonight's event with some general questions. So that after my super truncated introductions, what I thought we'd do is just have each of you describe your relationship with Ken and how you got to know him over the years.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, most of my accomplishments were in the 80s, and I'm pretty much a has-been, but I have been doing the Gay USA show since 1985 every week, and we still do it every week. I do it with Ann Northrup, and I go to Gay USA TV for that. And that's how not that, but I mean, gay activism is how I knew Ken. I mean, of course, famously getting elected the first openly gay. I looked up, and Ken had posted it, when he was elected, the New York Times, it was the year Koch was elected mayor, the closet case, and then in the story it said, and in the Upper West Side, it said and it didn't say gay, they let Ken say it, I'm the first out gay elected official in the state of New York, in a quote, because the Times wouldn't use the word gay other than in a quote. We were always avowed homosexuals. And so then I knew him as a friend, and when I moved into journalism, so by the time I interviewed him in 1984 for the New York City News, New York's gay and lesbian newspaper, he was already being hailed as a gay political pioneer in 1984, 40 years ago. So, that's how I know him, and of course I've been quoting him ever since.
After I accepted the invitation to do this panel, I started thinking about, all right, my time and my experience with Professor Sherrill, and it dawned on me, I have to correct your introduction slightly, Erin, I actually never took any of his classes. He was the department chair when I was a student here at Hunter College, but I spent so much time in the department and so much time just talking to him, getting his guidance, asking him questions. He probably wanted to kick me out of the office at a certain point because I was just trying to, like a sponge, soak up all this information. And I knew nothing about his political career. I knew nothing about his trailblazing activism, his legacy. I knew nothing. All I knew was that I was just this kid trying to learn everything I could about political science because I thought I wanted to do politics in my life. And here was someone who was willing to talk to me about it. And ever since then, I was just hooked on this idea of Professor Sherrill. And then after I graduated, we stayed in touch. And then once I got elected, within days, he had reached out to me and said, okay, now I have a to-do list of things for you to do. And we kind of renewed our correspondence and our relationship then. And so I'm sorry to say I was never his student, but certainly I was impacted by him and learned so much from him. He was my teacher, even if it was not in an official classroom capacity, which I'm very grateful for, actually, now that I think.
Ken, for me, was a mentor and a friend. I would say the connection started because we both did our PhD in political science at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, 50 years apart. I finished in 2018. Ken graduated in 1968. And so when I was a second or third year graduate student, Ken actually reached out to me asking if I wanted to present at a conference. I think this was who Ken was. He was very generous with his time with young scholars, and if you were a scholar studying LGBTQ politics, there was no way that at some point you wouldn't meet Ken. So that's how it started. He was always interested in ideas. He didn't really care much about status or rank, but if there was someone working on LGBTQ politics, he wanted to hear from you. And then over the years, the relationship turned into a friendship, and there is a moment that I think is the turning point, and it's, so I was doing, after my PhD, I did my postdoc at Princeton, so I was living in New Jersey. I got a job in LA, so I was about to move to LA, but I had a summer, and I decided that I wanted to spend the summer in New York, and so I found a room on Craigslist, and the room, I was supposed to move into that room on July 1st, and it's June 30, and it's Pride Day. I'm in the village with a friend, and I get a message that the room is no longer available. So now I'm in New York, and I don't know where to spend the night, basically. I didn't know many people. I had finished grad school, so I didn't have a lot of funds available to rent other rooms. So I write to Ken asking if he has any suggestion on what to do, and Ken tells me, well, why don't you come and spend the summer with me and Gerald? There's an empty room here in the house anyway. And so I spent the summer with Ken and his husband Gerald, and that's when the friendship started. And so, yeah.
Well, for me, meeting Ken, I think I was probably the only teenager who actually was excited to come to the Upper West Side from Washington Heights and volunteer to help out Ken's campaign for district leader.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little strange, and I can explain everything. But I didn't realize that I would meet Ken in a different capacity a few years later when I left Washington Heights to come to the Upper West Side in Ken's neighborhood to work for Congressman Jerry Nadler. And as Steve Strauss knows, those were amazing times, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit, but I will tell you that when you think about the non-paid position of district leader and the fact that so many political activists fought over these jobs, I cannot tell you to this day how special and important it was. Not that Ken was a member of Congress, not that Ken was a governor, not that Ken was a mayor, but once he became the district leader and smashed that glass ceiling, David Rothenberg, Tom Duane, all the names that would come later, was really because Ken showed a gay candidate, not an LGBT candidate, could win office. And I was very proud to know him. I did not understand at the time the impact he would have on my life, his special relationship with Gerald, which I think educated a lot of kids about love and about respect and being a human being. And he mentored politically, but he also taught people what was possible. And I'm really glad to be here tonight. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. We all have experiences with Ken as a political activist. So can you describe just one example of how Ken worked to advance LGBTQ and other minority rights and dignity that you're aware of?
Well, I mean, the most famous one to me. So he's a district leader. So he's working within the system. And I was a county committee member, which, as you know, is one of the lower ranks. And we were having the county committee meeting, which is just a pro forma exercise, right? But Fred Samuel, the city council member from Harlem, was the chair of the county committee. And he had voted against the gay rights bill, even though he was a closet case living with his mother. You know, maybe because he was a closet case living with his mother. And so Ken put forth a motion to depose him as chair of the county committee. This turned into a riot. And I can remember Fred grabbing the microphone and saying, "This isn't a goddamn gay rights demonstration." And we all shouted, "Yes, it is." And I think the motion might have failed, but they did get rid of Fred as in 1983 as the chair over this issue. And he died, in the closet a couple of years later, in 1985.
So something that I learned about as Ken reached out to me to give me my to-do list after I got elected, I was completely unaware of his role in helping to shape the transformation of CUNY when it went to the open enrollment system. And the struggle that brought about and the confrontation that it caused throughout the city in a very, very tough time in this city. And he played a leading role in thinking about how do you open up this People's University to all people. And I never had been exposed to that through him before. And he sat me down, he said, "This is what I did, and this is how we did it." And he brought that up to me in the context, because at the time that I was elected, the conversation around the specialized high schools was really at its most fevered pitch. And he said, "This is the same exact conversation that we're having 50 years later, and here's how I navigated that, and here's what you should be thinking about as you are going to be navigating these challenges." And that, to me, opened up this whole other chapter of awareness as to who he was, and what motivated him and what moved him, and the type of service he performed, even outside of the classroom or of the strictly academic setting.
In terms of how Ken promoted LGBTQ people and scholarship within the discipline in political science, a couple of things. He was one of the original members of the Committee on the Status of LGBTQ Individuals in Political Science. For a long time, the study of LGBTQ politics has been marginalized. Ken used to tell the story of how it took him 25 years to publish one of his papers because it was seen as not really scientific research, not really political science, just research. Ken also was, he started what then became known as the Ken Sherrill Prize. It's a fund, and it's an award for the best dissertation proposal on the empirical study of LGBTQ politics. It's a way to support with a prize and with a monetary award graduate students to send a message that this is a legitimate study, that this is a good scholarship, that there should be space for it in political science. And then the other thing that I would mention in terms of Ken being the scholar and the activist, he was an expert witness in several cases in front of the Supreme Court. For instance, he was an expert witness in the Romer v. Evans case in 1996, Colorado, and others. So these are just some of the examples.
So, sort of follow up what Andy was talking about. District leaders in those days were affiliated with local Democratic clubs, and on the Upper West Side, Community Free Democrats, the Three Parks Independent Democrats, were all these political organizations that in that time period in the 70s, 80s, 90s was considered or called the upper left side. I think the Times referred to the community. Now it's Astoria, right, the People's Republic of Astoria. But in those days, it was the Upper West Side. And part of the reason why it was a bastion of progressive values, but also just basic liberalism, was because as people like Ken got elected as local district leaders, the party started to change. And the way we would deal with it as political club members was the executive committee of the district leaders would meet. Think about Meet Esposito and Tammany Hall. Everything was run right, quietly, efficiently, but Manhattan Democrats would go as district leaders, meet for hours to pass resolutions, to get into fights, to scream, to yell, and to fight for good things, right? That was sort of what a district leader meeting was like. But the rest of us who were not district leaders would wait hours for that meeting to conclude, not because we wanted to hear from the elected officials. we needed to hear from Ken. So Ken, and I don't know if he did this in his classroom, Ken would plop up on a table, cross his legs, and go off for like an hour. And he had us energized, rolling, laughing, but he took on everybody. And it was sort of it was revolutionary in the sense that a district leader was it was not even a paid political functionary. It was just a functionary. And Ken started to build this office into a real soapbox for change on controversial issues. And he didn't care if he yelled at Jerry Nadler. He didn't care if he yelled at me. Ken was about doing what he thought was right. And the fact that he was able to be the professor in the political club environment, I think, has not been totally appreciated by the political class at that time. And as I hear Andrew and others talk about Ken as an academic, you can see how his two worlds actually did merge.
For those of you who don't know, he was grounded in the civil rights movement from the 60s because he went to the University of North Carolina and got involved in it back then.
Yeah, so we've I wanted to just talk a little bit more about his campaign for district leader, because this was a groundbreaking campaign. It was the first time in New York State that an openly gay individual was elected for public office. Can you tell us a bit about that campaign, how he was able to get elected, he was able to sort of break through the glass ceiling, right?
Look, he had a competitive election from a group, and this was really before my time. When I say I went down to volunteer, I mean I was in front of maybe Zabar's for an hour, and then I had to go home and do my homework. There was a group that was opposing Ken. These were the more moderate Democrat. I mean, they were the more moderate, but of course they were the right-wing Democrats against the Community Free Democrats. And Jerry Nadler weighed in, the local elected officials weighed in, but Ken would not have won if he couldn't do two things. He had to bring out his base. Yes, of course, there were a lot of LGBTQ people in the community excited. Not enough, because the district took in the West Side urban renewal area, which was a very more middle class, a lot of people of color, a lot of people didn't know Ken, a lot of people who were not as motivated in what Ken was trying to say. So Ken had to go in and knock those doors, because at the end of the day, it's a large office, but territory-wise, but he had to do it. And I think he did what every groundbreaking person does. He did it the hard way. He was the underdog, and I think he loved doing it. I think he loved winning, and he loved getting reelected, and he loved the role. And I think the neighborhood became drawn to that. But the campaign, like all campaigns, I think the first time, maybe Gerald would, if he were here, he would tell us, did Ken think he was going to win? I don't know. I don't know if he did. But he was really hell-bent on being first and winning, and I think he was very proud of it.
Yeah.
So I was not involved in that campaign. I was living in the East Village then. I didn't know him. But it was obviously very exciting when he got elected. And Ken was always invested in getting LGBTQ people elected. He was one of the early founding members of the Gay and Lesbian Independent Democrats, founded by Jim Owls. And when Jim Owls ran for city council, he supported him in '73 against Carol Greitzer. But that was a symbolic race. He knew Jim wasn't going to win. And it was funny because in '85, when David Rothenberg mounted a credible campaign against Carol Greitzer, Ken gave me an interview and said, I think it's a big mistake. He did. He said he's not going to win. He should run for an assembly seat. We haven't elected anybody to a assembly. Run for a smaller district. We need people elected in Brooklyn and Queens, and we shouldn't invest in this. It offended David very deeply, and of course David did lose. But that was his attitude. He was very practical about that.
Thank you all for talking a bit about that election. So what I'd like to do now is just turn to some specific questions, and I thought we would just continue with the political and then lead into the academic. So my first question is for Andy Humm. So following up on your discussion discussion of Ken as a political activist, so he was really known as sort of the go-to political scientist at Hunter for journalists, for independent assessments of politics. Can you describe a bit about why that was?
basically because he was an honest broker, as a commentator, as a pundit. He would give, as with David Rothenberg, we loved David, we all did. David's still around, he's 91. He just was giving you his assessment as a political scientist that this was not going to happen, and that was his attitude. When he was a Mondale alternate in 1984, I was a Jesse Jackson delegate in those days, but he was asked to comment on the Hart campaign. Gary Hart was the flavor of the week, and he said, "Oh." He says he's not even a sponsor of the federal gay rights law, and he sends a cute blonde to gay independent Democrats to try to win votes. It was terrible. So he was very frank about all that, and it was nice to see Carolyn Maloney here.
All right, so my next question is for Scott. So you also knew Ken as a good friend and as just a force in local politics. And can you talk a bit about his involvement in local campaigns, not only his groundbreaking campaign, but also just continuing through today? Because I know he continued to be involved in local politics for years.
Look, he was a big supporter of mine when in every office I ran for, borough president, controller, mayor. He was just a great mentor. But, it was funny. There were times when he'd be quoted because he was a very sought after commentator, as Andy said. And sometimes the commentary was, Stringer, it's going to be tough for him. Sometimes he was right, but and I would be like, okay, how do I deal with this? Come on, man. Can't we just, that wasn't Ken. If you weren't winning, he was going to tell you that. He'll support you. But so I always thought that was my little conundrum as he became the spokes or the analyst. It's very whatever. And then the other thing that I would say in campaigns is he didn't always go along to get along. He had a lot of Bella Abzug in him, and no, it's real. And was that whole generation of all of us who got involved. Where's Harold left? Did I mention Bella's name and he didn't hear it? Okay, but he wasn't always with the club. So when the club, meaning the elected officials and others, wanted to go a different way, if Ken didn't want to be there, Ken would take the campaign right outside the club. That was it. Jerry Nadler says, "Look, I think we should do it this way." He goes, "I don't, right?" And that was it. Suddenly we had a split in the club. Now, I worked for Jerry. He's my mentor. I'm not going to deny that. But I really like Ken. So if you don't tell Jerry this, I was kind of, Ken's kind of right. We don't have to. So we had that relationship, in the club. But he was a endorser. So that means he was a player in the club. In other words, most people, unfortunately, in politics, I don't wish this on anybody, but a lot of times the people in office don't necessarily lose until they die. And then the county committee, which is local people in their square block, get mobilized to pick the Democratic successor. People said that should change. Maybe, Andrew, you can do it in Albany. But Ken was very much mindful of that responsibility, the quality of the county committee, making sure there was representation, that it simply wasn't a rubber stamp of the elected officials and the like.
Thank you. So bridging our discussion of Ken as a politico and as a political activist, I thought we'd turn to Andrew to tell us a bit about Ken as an undergraduate mentor and his impact on you both before and after college.
Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to, or I said in my earlier remarks, I never actually took a class directly with Ken, but I spent so many hours in his office asking, if I want to go into politics, what's the best thing I should be thinking about? Does this internship make sense? Does that internship make sense? Am I on the right track here? I was I don't say I was lost, but I was very curious about finding the right way as opposed to a way through my years here at Hunter. And he was just very patient in explaining everything. And, at the time, I just thought that's what people did and what professors, and thankfully a lot of my professors did the same. But he was just so easy to talk to. And to me, that was very reassuring because here I was, this student who, at the time, admittedly, I didn't even want to be up here. I had plans to go somewhere else for school, and I didn't know how to make this work for me in that time in my life. And he put me right at ease, and he showed me that there was a way to study what I loved and to be a part of what I loved and to pursue outside opportunities right here in my own backyard. And I was 18, I was precocious, I had these big ambitions for life, and he helped show me that you can do those things even right here staying home. That was really important to me, I think, as it helped set me on my path throughout the rest of my college years. And then later on in my career, in my trajectory, where I would say I probably learned the most from Ken, though, was not in my time here at Hunter. It was after I had graduated, after we became friends on Facebook, and I started reading all of his opera reviews. Because I developed a deep appreciation and love for the opera when I was in law school as a way of taking my mind off of things. And how do I learn how to navigate all this? You just go to Ken's Facebook page. We saw this performance last night. It was terrible because this person stunk and that person stunk. And I was like, wow, that's how you actually interpret live music. That's how you think about this art form. And that's one of the things I probably miss the most about him, honestly, is having that type of education, that type of exposure to someone who was so cultured in so many ways, and just being so, as he was with his political commentary, just so free thinking about it and willing to share it with everybody. So that, I think, among other things, was what I learned from him and what I missed the most of my experience of him.
So just continuing on with Ken as a mentor, Ken was, I think, one of the strongest mentors for LGBTQ political scientists. I know he attended, I think, most of my panels when I went to APSA. He would always check in to see how I was doing, even like through the job market. So I thought I'd ask Gabe just to describe to us a bit about Ken's impact on you as a mentor as a young political scientist.
I think one of the most important, example that Ken has given me as a role model is that he was really a true scholar activist. So Ken really loved research and data. He did statistical analysis very early on, but he always thought that academic research was most meaningful when he could leave the ivory tower and he could help make people's life better. So that's why he was always involved in local politics as an expert witness. He wanted to have an impact even outside the classroom. And he was not afraid to make sure that he would get what he needed. So, for instance, the paper that he wrote in 1973 that took him 25 years to publish was a paper about followers and leaders in the gay movement, and how do you find data about gay people when there are no surveys in the early 1970s. So what Ken did, he went to a firehouse in Chinatown that had been given to gay people for meeting and dances, and he would conduct surveys when people would take a break from dancing. They would go and get some water. Ken would ask them, hey, could you take a survey? So he really wouldn't give up. And he was always able to find ways to get what he needed and also to make his voice heard. He had to fight within the discipline, for the discipline to recognize the importance of this research. And one of the things that he used to say is that if they don't understand how important this research is, make them understand. And here I'm thinking about a paper, an article that was published in the early 90s, 1992, about AIDS, HIV/AIDS, and the title of the article is "What Political Science is Missing by Not Studying AIDS." So more than 10 years into the start of the HIV/AIDS epidemics, there was very little research on AIDS. And Ken wrote this article in which he says, well, it's not just a problem in itself, but by not studying AIDS, we are not understanding how processes of political mobilization work, how policy making works, how local politics and organizing and activism interact to work together. And if we don't study AIDS, we're missing out on a phenomenon that cuts across sexual orientation, gender identity, race, socioeconomic status, national boundaries. So it's really a loss for the discipline. So he always had a very clever way to make people realize why they should pay attention to topics and areas of scholarship that had been long marginalized.
Yeah. So, and before he wrote his AIDS paper, he wrote his gay paper, which he got published, which said being gay or lesbian in those days, they would just say, or bisexual, was the #1 reason that if you were brought up a Republican, you became a Democrat. He proved this. And of course, you could look at a poll today I mean, the Human Rights Campaign just came out with a poll that said Trump is polling at 8% among LGBTQ people, that low. And this made, I think, people in politics pay attention to the LGBTQ vote and what a block it was and how much it was important.
So I guess we've started. We initially had Pat Egan on the panel, but I forgot to say at the beginning, he had to drop out because he got COVID at the last minute. So I had another question about his research, but I think I can just broadly ask the panel to chime in about it. So Ken presented the first paper, I believe, on LGBTQ plus politics at the American Political Science Association in the 1970s. I think he was partially, if not fully, responsible for the continuation of the sexuality and politics section. I know in the 2010s, when I was just in graduate school, the membership had dropped off so much that it was a question as to whether or not we would be getting panels in future years, and that's when he really turned up his mentorship and turned the section around, and now we're this a regular force at the American Political Science Association. So I guess that's my awareness of Ken and his impact on political scientists. But can you say a little bit more about how he really pushed LGBTQ politics to be an important part of political science as a field?
Yeah, so I think that's a great example. Now the Sexuality and Politics section has more than 300, almost 350 members, which is quite a lot for an American Political Science Association section. And I mean, I think Ken sometimes was nicknamed the dean of LGBTQ politics because he really studied so much in terms of the identities and the political behavior of LGBTQ people. He conducted one of the first large-scale survey of the political behavior of LGBTQ people with Hunter and the Human Rights Campaign. He wrote about a lot of topics, from gays in the military to marriage equality to Prop 8 in California. He wrote a very successful American government textbook, which, by the way, was the first textbook that included LGBTQ issues and pictures of gay men in the textbook, so he didn't shy away even when he was speaking to a more mainstream audience. I think we briefly mentioned before, he studied at UNC for his PhD, and initially he was studying racial attitudes and black political participation, so he also published on this topic. So he was always committed to studying minorities and the political behavior and participation and representation of minorities.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that, Gabe. I have two other general questions, and because I'm running this as more of an academic panel, I thought we would open it up for some audience questions that they might have of the panelists about Ken. I guess we could do my last question before turning it to the audience because of just for time. So thinking back on Ken's activism and research, what do you think Ken would hope for the future of LGBTQ politics in America? I guess that's a big question.
Well, I'm just trying to look back at the things that he said back in the day. You know, Ken, even in 1984, was saying, the people coming along are not like the people in the movement now, 1984. We were all anti-Vietnam War. We dressed differently. These other people have come in, and they, you know, and so we saw the shift going on. And he was always interested, and I guess in terms of all this mentoring stuff, in the older people, and he was older than me, passing it on to the next generation, and also of us learning from the younger generation.
I think his legacy, and actually I'm learning a lot about this from his academic perspective, because we came from the streets, not from academia, so I'm limited. But I will tell you that a lot of what occurred over the success of the movement was because of Ken. Like, I was at one of those city council hearings, Andy. You think a city council hearing is a city council hearing? It was vile, dangerous, and disgusting. I testified as a young, whatever organization I was, and I was like afraid for my life in the city council because during the gay rights bill, people really wanted to harm. And Ken was front and center in that, as you were. And I was very proud, and he was very proud, and we talked about it, when we introduced the first gay marriage bill in Albany, 5 of us. And I remember saying to myself, you know, this bill is going to take 20, 30 years to pass, right? And I just felt it was the right thing to start now, because some people in the movement were like, marriage too far, right? Not enough. Remember those debates?
Well, there were all kinds of debates over it.
Right. So I'm just saying, so when that bill was passed, because Ken was to me, go all in and get it done. And much to people's surprise, the world shifted. It turned out not to be, it turned out to be a wonderful thing for grandmothers and grandparents and parents. And you know, I think Ken helped move that. And, you know, I think that's
We always
important.
lost on the gay rights bill all the time until we finally passed it in '86. We were the first city to introduce it, one of the last big cities to pass it. And so one of the hearings where we're going to lose, he's up there. They made him the last person to testify, and he was furious. So he just got up in front of the council members and said, "You are the group with the highest crime rate of any group in the city. You should all be ashamed of yourselves." And it was true. Not in your day.
You know, I will tell you, just, you know, I was, you know, as controller, we did an annual LGBTQ event, and one of the last events I was able to do, we honored Ken. And, you know, I'm not going to, when he got up to speak, it was a very kind and gentle and very moving human being in the audience, and I expected him to get up and make like the usual Ken speech, and I think he felt even then like he did well. His life had made, you know, his life had made a difference, and I was very honored, because I don't know how many of you know that to get the Controller Proclamation is one of the great honors. It's like the Presidential Medal of Freedom. and you know, Obama and I, you know, and I gave it to Ken, and I think he was very proud of it to this day. You could get it too.
Well, I guess now we can turn it to the audience. If anyone has any questions of our panel. Yeah.
Hi, just a quick question. This will sound hypothetical, but I know some of you. Oh, thanks. This will sound hypothetical, but I'm quite certain that some of you will know the answer to this directly from Ken. What would Ken want out of the upcoming mayoral primary?
I think you know, but thank you.
Not about who not to support, who to support.
I'm trying to remember what he said about the last one. You know, I mean, so I'm not entirely sure.
I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah, you can go back to his Twitter feed, or what do they call it, X, and go back to and you'll figure it out.
Just wanted to bring back.
Who are you?
Rick Landman. In '77, I was on the executive committee of Gay Independent Democrats as the NDC delegate. And so this was when Ken, I think that was the year he was running. You have to remember, you were allowed to have 2 clubs if you were gay. So I was in VID because I lived, you know, there, but GID was like for all 5 boroughs. No, we weren't GLID yet. GLID was when Deborah Glick came and took over the club in our budget. This is Gay Independent Democrats was
You're right.
from then and up until Jim Levin and Bill Hirsch was president and vice president. And so as a result, we were running him as our first big candidate. So when you were saying, you know, those gays were part of the group, yes, he was our only candidate, even though we had members from all of the 5 boroughs in Gay Independent Democrats. He was the focus. So we all sort of shared in his victory.
That's a very important historical notation.
I know. I'm older than you. I worked on Bella. I was one of Bella's boys, and then worked on the mayoral campaign. And what do you mean your mother didn't support her? I thought they were cousins.
No. I don't read the book. She ended up, it was a roundabout kind of.
Okay, good.
No spoilers.
Hi, some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm Trudy Mason, and I'm vice chair of the New York State. Now, okay, recognition there. And I know Scott since he was a little boy. And I was a good friend of his mother's, who also was close to Ken. And I first met Ken because I was the complete, well, not the antithesis, because as Ken told me later on, I was what was known as an ally. But I was a straight woman from the East Side, and so the complete opposite. But as we got to know each other, and especially with a lot of things that I did, and lectures that I gave here at Hunter, as a matter of fact. But Ken and I became close because nobody would expect two district leaders, one from the, as I said, a district leader from the, that was the first thing that I did in politics, or the first office that I held. But it was so good getting to know Ken, because when I walked in here before, people said, "What are you doing here?" And it is because he was so open, so good, well, what I would call a mensch. He was an absolute mensch. He was somebody, and the fact that he and I became close friends, close allies, says something about him, that he would deal with an East Sider, Scott, because and it was just a joy to get to know him over the years, because he was so open, and really very, very smart also, which none of you have, you've talked about as being a professor and everything, but he had such wisdom and it was just a joy, which is why I am here tonight, just because when I found out that there was something for Ken, I said, I'm kind of older than you even, and no, I've just turned 82, so I'm, but I pulled myself out to get here tonight, because I think it is wonderful that people who didn't know Ken that well, and a lot of people that I knew on the East Side, who, again, never really got to know him, but he was truly, I'll say it again, a true mensch.
And you mentioned how open he was. And I wouldn't want this forum to end without saying what a lot of his friends have said when I interviewed him for his obituary. He was the most sex-positive person in politics that you could ever know. He didn't just believe in women's liberation or gay liberation as an identity and black liberation. He believed in sexual liberation. And for any of you who've been on his list, no, seriously. And there was no shame in him compared to, Donald Trump, who lies about the affair he's having right now with this woman, and, the governor of, North Carolina, where Ken went to school, who was trying to deny that he was involved in porn sites and all this kind of stuff. Ken had no shame in him.
That's why he became friends with an East Side straight woman.
He wasn't ashamed of you.
I think to different direction completely, and Gabriel, maybe this is a question for you, but bouncing off of Ken's legacy and bringing it more current day with I'm from Indiana, so we have Pete Buttigieg, woo, and kind of just your scholarly opinion on how when he was maybe going to be a part of the ticket with Kamala, and kind of the conversations and the dynamic, how it's changed since Ken's time and current day, and what that would have done potentially for the ticket. I don't know, or any in your expertise, if that is not, yeah.
So I guess, I'm not gonna make prediction or like what would have been, but what I can tell you, I did do a large study on how Pete Buttigieg would do, like it was an experiment with about 6,000 American voters, and this was when he was actually running in the Democratic presidential primary, so in 2020, and in hypothetical matchup with Donald Trump. So the experiment was set up in a way that different respondents in the survey would get different information about Pete Buttigieg. So me and a co-author emphasize that he was gay, or that he was a veteran, or that he was a religious man, because we wanted to evaluate how these different characteristics would do with voters. And when he was presented as a gay man, the penalty was not statistically significant, which basically means that he was not losing votes for being openly gay. When he was presented as an openly gay veteran, did especially well. So even better than when he was just presented as a mayor. And so I think this is quite surprising, because for a long time, being gay in politics was seen as a negative trait. That's not necessarily the case. To just give you just to give you another example, in the survey that I did with the Victory Institute with the LGBTQ candidates, one of the questions that we had for candidates was whether they perceive their sexual orientation or gender identity as a plus or as a disadvantage in their campaigns, and the higher number of people said that it was an advantage. Not that there is no prejudice, discrimination, but those people are probably not gonna vote anyway for Liberal Democrats, so you're not gonna campaign for them. But for many people, it matters to have someone who can provide a different type of representation, that can provide a different type of voice at the table. And so I think it is a sea change that we have seen in the last 15 years or so.
Not from an academic perspective, but I remember many of the debates that were happening in political clubs across my district at the time during the 2020 Democratic primary, and kind of in contrast to maybe as Ken being a pioneer, and how you mentioned that all of the clubs rallied around him. He was their standard bearer, even if he wasn't from that district. That's what I meant, yes, yeah. But you mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 clubs across the city that were supporting him, right? Oh, just, okay. But there was, I think, a really interesting debate that I witnessed amongst Democratic primary voters, gay Democratic activists in Brooklyn, for example, about whether they would be supporting Pete Buttigieg, because whether or not he was gay or not had no bearing on what they wanted to see in their Democratic candidate. And I think that just shows the evolution, especially of the Democratic Party, in accepting, as you said, with no difference, whether someone is gay or straight, as a candidate for any office. And what was mobilizing and interesting to these voters as they were making their decisions, and these are the most active political participants, because they're the ones parts of these clubs. They're doing this because it's fun for them, and they're volunteering to be part of these associations to endorse candidates. And I do remember a number of heated conversations among several clubs and several members, whether or not it was acceptable just to support Pete just because he was the gay candidate, or whether they wanted something more from another candidate, or someone else had a better vision. And so I just think it speaks to the evolution that we kind of have been talking about this entire evening tonight.
Just one sort of comment about what you said. I do think the Pete phenomenon, the sort of acceptance, the Obama-Harris, the fact that the world is changing. It hasn't been so long. I mean, when we supported Deborah Glick for Manhattan Borough President, I felt even then that there was real backlash, even in Manhattan, to a candidate beyond her district. That there were people whose attitude, even though they didn't say it, I could feel it on the West Side. I could feel it when I campaigned. I don't think that in recent history with Tom Duane, Brad Hoylman, and you start naming all the candidates that have been elected, I don't think people even think about it, but I think it's evolved. And I'm actually curious from your academic perspective, at least in my opinion, the Ken Sherrills of the world played a big role, but politics in the world has also helped, right? And there's cause for optimism. And I think if Harris wins, it's because of this collective feeling in the country that quality matters.
I don't want us to leave also without hearing one of Ken's last words of wisdom on one of his tweets. Now, you remember the Anita Bryant campaign? She, defeated a gay rights bill and, got it overturned in Miami. The same year he got elected. And her motto was, gay people have to recruit because they can't reproduce, which is, of course, not true, but that's what she said. So he said, here's my Anita Bryant rule. Winning parties recruit. They don't reproduce. And he said that Andrew Cuomo is the one who never learned this rule.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. My name is Steve Simmering. This is a wonderful panel, but to me it's been like an out-of-body experience. Ken is one of my oldest friends. I'm still in shock and grief from his loss. To come into a group of people like this and hear one of your oldest friends described as an icon is an out-of-body experience. I met Kenny at the opera. He and I were both supernumeraries, that is, spear carriers in Aida. Kenny knew a great deal about opera. We used to talk about opera. He would name in Wagner the third Norn in Götterdämmerung. Nobody even knew who sang Brunhilde, but he could name the third Norn. He knew a great deal about that. At the opera, for example, there was no discrimination about gay people. In fact, it was mainly gay. So it was, and this is a very long time ago. I knew Kenny before he met Gerald. And I remember how they fell in love, and what a wonderful and beautiful thing that was. You mentioned that Kenny was out beyond out. I loved the phrase of closet case referring to this politician. Kenny was whatever the opposite was. He also, as you said, embraced sexuality in a wild and very, very positive way. Also, in the darker side of things, I knew Kenny back in the 70s. We were through the whole AIDS epidemic, the AIDS Holocaust together. And it's almost to repress what happened in those times. We had a common friend, George. And George's, in those days, we used to say lover. They didn't have husbands in those days. Both got AIDS. His partner died very quickly of PCP pneumonia. Because George was in San Francisco, that saved his life, because in San Francisco they were developing drug therapies, triple drug therapy, and he was one of the first recipients of triple drug retrovirus therapy, and he continued to live. Kenny was just an extremely kind, extremely open person. We always talked about, we had dinner a few times, every few months, whenever we could, and we wouldn't talk about politics. We talked about everything, mainly about opera. He is just really very, very missed. He was a very beautiful person. The memories just come flooding in. I remember at that time that we were in the opera. We were doing an opera called Macbeth by Verdi. And Kenny, at that point, was always this little skinny, blonde, cute boy back in those days. He had gained some weight. So there was this picture of Kenny, and he showed it to me. He was still a cute, blonde boy, but he gained this weight. And he says, it's not Macbeth, it's Mack Truck. I still remember that comment. So he will not easily be, the whole world has changed. You talk about Pete Buttigieg. You couldn't even mention gay back in those days. But Kenny didn't give a shit. Kenny was Kenny, and he was always the same way.
One more comment in the back, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think of gay scholars like Martin Duberman and, notable journalists like Randy Schultz. Could you say something about Ken's legacy academically here at Hunter and elsewhere?
I guess about Ken's legacy, he helped, found 2 awards in LGBTQ politics in political science. Those awards are really important for your CV when it comes to getting jobs. So I think that, and all the scholars I know who have gotten those awards have been hired as on tenure track lines. So he really helped foster a whole generation of scholars by starting those. He also would every year on his birthday raise money for the awards, so that the people who won them would actually have a monetary award to go with it. And then just to talk about his reach, I'm doing a new project on reproductive rights in Arizona, and I was at an event after the signature drop for the Ballot Initiative campaign in July, and I met the head of the ACLU there. And when I was talking with him, I told him I was from Hunter, and he's like, well, you must know Ken. And Ken was apparently an expert witness on his gay rights cases in the 1990s. And this was like just completely a whole state away, how he really just has this far-reaching impact, not only on LGBTQ politics, but also on a variety of civil rights issues, just continuing through today. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Well, I'll tell you that, CUNY at large, but particularly Hunter, has graduated a number of individuals who have gone on to careers in politics, either as elected officials like myself, and I have a number of colleagues who graduated this school, or serve in high-level positions in government, the governor's office, the mayor's office, and we all find each other. And when we all heard the news about Ken passing, we were all of these alums, some who had Ken as a teacher, some who just knew who he was, but everyone that came through this school and came through the political science department or otherwise, we were all just talking to each other and trying to comfort each other and texting each other. And I think that speaks to him not only as an individual, but also the role that he had on this entire institution. And that even if you didn't have him as a professor, you were still touched by him in some way, that you felt his loss when he was no longer here. And easily a dozen or more folks, I can tell you, we were all kind of commiserating with each other and mourning his passing, when we heard the news. And I don't know if you can say that about a lot of other institutions. I don't know if you can say that about a lot of other people. But certainly we all felt his impact, and we all deeply miss him still.
All right, well, I think we are at about the end of the night. I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you so much for the panelists. Oh yeah, we can do a picture. I do want to make a quick announcement about 2 upcoming events that we have. The first is for students. I see a couple of you in the audience. We have an advocacy workshop coming up on issues in the 2024 general election. So be on the lookout for that. It'll be on October 8th. And we also secured Moises Kaufman to do a Q&A with the audience after a screening of the Laramie Project, where we're going to be talking about violence against the LGBTQ community from the past to the present. And that'll be on October 9th, Wednesday, October 9th at 5:30, so the same time. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you to the staff and AV staff for making this possible. And we have a reception in the next room.